Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank you, thanking all my commissioners and the leadership that's here today. Obvious with this collection of folks that are here, today's a pretty important day, and also to members of the press for covering what we consider to be an existential issue, not just to Minnesota, but our planet, and Minnesota once again taking a lead. We know that climate change threatens the very things that make Minnesota a great place to live, from our magnificent 10,000 lakes to our farmable land and clean air. Climate change is no longer a far-off possibility, as Minnesotans across our state are suffering through its devastating effects right now, and it will only continue to get worse. I'll use a quote from yesterday as we're on the eve of the Madrid summit on climate. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres made this point: "The point of no return is no longer over the horizon. It is in sight and hurtling towards us now. Increasing weather extremes have created unprecedented rainfall, hailstorms, tornadoes, and droughts with billions of dollars in damage. As the growing zones creep further north, farmers can no longer reasonably predict their growing seasons. We must protect Minnesota's way of life by putting our state at the forefront of finding innovative solutions to climate change. That's why today I'm signing an executive order to establish a Climate Change Subcabinet to advise this administration on policies to combat climate change. This Climate Change Subcabinet will identify policies and implement strategies that will help Minnesota reduce statewide greenhouse gas emissions. By working collaboratively with commissioners across agencies and the public, we'll better achieve solutions around climate change. This is about being intentional and operational, policies and strategies to make sure that the state is not only addressing emissions, but resiliencies are built into everything that we do. Because of the devastating effects of climate change, we have to think about how we build our roads differently. We have to think about shoreline protection. We have to think about growing seasons, and we have to think about health impacts as temperatures change throughout the state. As the chair of the Governor's Biofuels Commission, we've done things to move the state moving towards more renewable fuels. The subcabinet will expand on other work we're doing. This year, it was proposed new policies that will lead Minnesota to 100% clean energy by 2050. And we did the single biggest move that the state has ever done with the intention of reducing emissions through our transportation system with our clean cars legislation that is now in rulemaking. Tackling climate change requires bold thinking and collaboration. The Climate Change Subcabinet will work across state government to develop strategies that will mitigate the changes. The subcabinet brings a new, clearer emphasis for state agencies to work together to track the impact of climate change on the state, as well as drive new policies. It taps into the wide breadth of knowledge, experience, and innovation throughout Minnesota to develop new ways our state government can partner with local communities, with local industry, and with our research institutions. This collaborative effort will foster fresh approaches to prepare the state for the already felt impacts of climate change. Together as one Minnesota, we can make a difference on climate, and this Climate Change Subcabinet will help Minnesota pioneer the green economy, because it's very clear that if Washington won't lead, Minnesota will need to. And now I'd like to turn it over to Lieutenant Governor Flanagan.
Well, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. As the governor mentioned, our administration has already led forward-thinking initiatives and policies to help Minnesota prepare for climate change. With the establishment of a new subcabinet is one more step that we are taking to be leaders on tackling this issue. As a mom, I think about climate change every single day. It's an existential threat that impacts all Minnesotans and our ability to thrive. Communities, farms, and industry face more frequent extreme weather events that threaten the infrastructure that we rely on to connect all parts of our state, cause undue economic stress, and place our communities and environment at risk. This executive order on climate takes Minnesota to the next level of preparedness and action against climate change and its harmful effects. The magnitude of climate change and its impact on every aspect of Minnesota requires leadership that pulls together the best of Minnesota. It calls for resources from our public and private sectors with participation from communities in every part of the state, including every social and economic class, to form timely solutions. Climate change is a complex problem, and our administration recognizes the impact of climate change that is disproportionately felt by marginalized communities. Disparities, including those based on race, gender, geography, and economic status, exist in Minnesota, and they prevent all of us from reaching our full potential as a state. These disparities can be exacerbated by policies that do not consider equity. That is why, in making account of today's climate realities, Minnesota must leverage change to not only protect our people and resources, but also foster a vibrant green economy while embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion of all. Changes in our environment bring with it new health concerns as mild winters and warmer overnight temperatures increase flooding and our exposure to pathogens and contaminants. This will require the ingenuity of world-class medical researchers to foster healthcare breakthroughs to take us into this literal new climate. By working collaboratively, we can work to build resilient communities, promote community prosperity, mitigate risks to our farms and businesses, and create a homegrown, clean economy. This subcabinet aims to work across state agencies in a coordinated approach to develop equitable strategies that will mitigate climate change and achieve greater resilience. This, in turn, will help us not only fulfill Minnesota's statutory goals, but avoid the severe economic, health, and ecological impacts associated with changing climate, and fully realize the benefits of a healthy, sustainable, and resilient state. And with that, I would like to turn it over to our Pollution Control Agency Commissioner, Laura Bishop.
Good morning, and thank you, Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. The Climate Subcabinet brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to one of the most complicated and urgent challenges we face as a society today. I'm excited to be chairing this effort. The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's mission is to protect and improve the environment and human health. Yet, it is incumbent upon all of us in Minnesota to uphold this mission. And climate change is our greatest challenge. We must act to protect the Minnesota we love and the Minnesota we want and expect for our future generations. Through stronger agency collaboration and coordination, we can work across all sectors of the economy to combat climate change by significantly reducing greenhouse gas emissions and improving community resilience. Governor Walz and I recently visited the new wastewater treatment plant in Detroit Lakes. Their new state-of-the-art facility not only removes more harmful contaminants from our waters, but was also built with climate change in mind. The facility was designed to handle the most extreme weather events. Our climate subcabinet can help more communities like Detroit Lakes better prepare for the impacts of climate change. But we must also find ways to mitigate climate change as well. At the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, we're working to implement clean car standards, requiring car manufacturers to provide more low emissions and electric vehicle options in our state, which will improve the quality of our air and reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the state. But this is not enough. It's one part of a larger plan that we need to enact for Minnesota. And state government cannot solve these challenges alone. As a former leader at a Minnesota Fortune 100 company, I know Minnesota businesses are eager to engage and bring their innovations and insights to the table. Our Minnesota companies are leaders in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In addition, I've spoken to numerous mayors all across the state who are already leading on climate initiatives. It's going to take leadership from every corner of Minnesota. The Climate Advisory Council that we plan to establish will consist of community and business leaders, environmental leaders, scientists, local officials, and other relevant stakeholders committed to bold ideas to address climate change and prepare our state to respond to the impacts of our changing climate. We are going to unleash our collective innovative spirit to tackle climate change and build on the current initiatives that we have, including the clean car standards, building a statewide electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and leading the state on a path to 100% clean energy by 2050. And with that, I want to turn it over to our fellow commissioner, Steve Kelly.
Thank you, Commissioner Bishop. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you, Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, to thank you for your bold and courageous leadership on climate change. One of the duties of the Climate Change Subcabinet you have announced today is to identify policies and implementation strategies for the state to meet or exceed the economy-wide greenhouse gas emission goals of the Next Generation Energy Act and achieve 100% clean energy by 2050. Last year, the governor introduced the One Minnesota Path to Clean Energy, a set of policy proposals that will lead Minnesota to 100% clean energy in the state's electric sector by 2050. This plan is an historic opportunity to create a better future for our state. Establishing a clean energy standard of 100% by 2050 is ambitious, but it is essential to have a clear policy standard to enable an orderly transition to the new energy economy, not just for energy companies, but also, for example, for financial institutions that will face lower risk if we act in an orderly way. The 100% standard sets a destination but does not dictate a specific roadmap. It allows flexibility for utilities to choose their own best course. It also enables Minnesota workers to be an essential part of the solution. Already more than 61,000 Minnesotans work in clean energy, with 40% of those jobs in greater Minnesota. As we build a broader clean energy economy, we can expect that number to go much higher. As part of the One Minnesota Path to Clean Energy, the Clean Energy First policy will broaden Minnesota's existing preference for clean energy in utility resource planning. Utilities will need to demonstrate why clean energy would not work whenever they propose to replace or add new generating capacity. And energy optimization expands our conservation improvement program that has made Minnesota a nationally recognized leader in energy efficiency. The governor's proposal will set higher energy efficiency goals, but it also provides flexibility and incentives for utilities to develop innovative new programs to help consumers and businesses switch to more efficient, clean energy, including in some cases to electric transportation, the kind that Commissioner Bishop was describing. Importantly, it will also dedicate more energy efficiency resources for low-income households so these Minnesotans can heat and cool their homes more efficiently and reduce their utility bills. These three policy proposals should not be a surprise. They reflect and draw on collaborative, wide-ranging discussions among Minnesota's many energy stakeholders in recent years. We will need to continue that collaborative process as we work together for these policies to succeed. And we will succeed because we know how. It was only a few years ago, in 2007, that Minnesota passed the landmark Next Generation Energy Act, setting a renewable energy standard of 25% by 2025. It had nearly universal support in the legislature and was signed into law by Republican Governor Tim Walz. At that time, just 8% of Minnesota's electricity was generated from clean energy. 10 years later, it is already 25%, effectively meeting the standard years ahead of schedule. In Minnesota, clean energy is already a success story. So I'm looking forward to working with my commissioner colleagues on the Climate Subcabinet to write Minnesota's next chapter with the One Minnesota Path to Clean Energy under the bold leadership of Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. Now I want to turn it over to Steve Morse to provide a perspective from the Minnesota environmental advocacy community.
Thanks, Commissioner. Thanks, Steve. Thank you. Good morning, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm super delighted to be part of this important announcement. Thank you, Governor Walz, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, and Commissioners Bishop and Kelly and the other leaders for stepping up and saying we are going to tackle this in a new way and take it to the next level. We've got a long history of successes, but now we understand we have to ramp it up. As you may know, the Minnesota Environmental Partnership is a coalition of more than 70 leading environmental and conservation organizations that are active across the state. As a coalition that covers many issues, we know that right now, right here, there is no issue that is more fundamental or has a broader impact than the climate crisis we are facing. We call it our greatest challenge and our greatest opportunity. We say the greatest opportunity because we look forward to the tremendous opportunities that will be created as part of this transition to a low-carbon economy of the future.
I like Commissioner Bishop's comment about unleashing our collaborative innovation, I think it was, and that's exactly what it's all about. How are we going to be out in front to get the most success out of this next generation? How are we going to benefit from or we will benefit when we have fewer deaths caused by air pollution from the burning of fossil fuels, currently running at 4,000 a year here in Minnesota. The call for stronger, more aggressive action has never been louder. Last week's greenhouse gas emissions gap report from the United Nations couldn't have been clearer. Although we have taken some steps here in the right direction, we need to dramatically up our game. The unfortunate truth is that global emissions are continuing to rise at a rate of 1.5% per year. And now, according to the head of the UN Environmental Program, quote, we need to catch up for the years in which we procrastinated. If we don't, the 1.5 degree centigrade goal that we have for global warming will be out of reach by the next decade. This means that 1.5% annual increase that we're doing right now has to be converted to a more than 7% reduction every year starting next month and going forward in order to reach the target that we need to reach and avoid the most catastrophic climate impacts. The climate crisis is no longer an issue that can be managed by a few groups and agencies focused on energy and the environment. It is not a niche issue. It does now, and will more so in the future, affect each of us and the systems on which we all depend, whether they are the natural systems or the civil systems that we've created. And that is why we are so excited today to see the leadership of the state coming forward and saying we are signing this executive order. We think it's exciting because it's a foundational step in developing the ideas and building the understanding and support for the critical next steps to move forward. Only by bringing all the players to the table will we be able to build the broad, comprehensive solutions that are called for now. We need transportation, agriculture, housing, business, and labor to all be engaged in creating and implementing the needed solutions. It's reassuring to see the governor directing his top staff in these areas and more to focus on what needs to be done to combat climate change and to get it moving. It's very action-oriented. I want to commend the governor for also designing a strong process for active public engagement in developing our ramped-up response to the climate crisis. There's almost a palpable level of growing concern and frustration amongst Minnesotans over how we can prevent and respond to the challenge in a fair, equitable, and just manner. At the same time, there are many workers and businesses which fear the impending transformation might mean as we move away from fossil fuels. It is imperative that all of these voices be given a forum, that they be heard, and that their perspectives be taken into account as we move forward to build our robust, clean, low-carbon future. So thank you, Governor Walz, and your team for putting this together, for moving us forward, for your leadership, your initiatives on 100% clean energy, clean cars, and other climate solutions. And thank you for your actions today to formulate a structure that will take us to the next level to comprehensively tackle this defining issue of our time. This will only happen with strong executive leadership, and we appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Well, as we prepare to sign this executive order, I hope you hear it from both internally across the enterprise of state government, from Commissioner Bishop, Kelly, and all the others that will be working on this, and also from the leadership of Steve Morris and the environmental community and the business community. Let's be absolutely clear. I think Steve summed this up right. This is an existential challenge, but it gives us an incredible opportunity. What we know is that we need to do this. We need to reduce carbon emissions. We need to start thinking forward and mitigation, but it creates incredible opportunities. We can no longer afford to build billion-dollar flood diversions because of what's happening in the climate. We have to think about ways to be smarter about this. We can no longer allow our greatest resource, our topsoil, to be washed away in what used to be 500-year flood events are now 5-year flood events. And we can't set and think about where the jobs of the future are going to come from instead of us being the leaders and creating them. They're going to come through innovation. They're going to come through the clean energy economy. They're going to come through what Minnesota has always done. tackle the toughest problems, lean into the bold north, and start leading the rest of the country where we need to go. So I'm proud to sign this document, this EO. I'm proud, as Steve said, to put a foundational piece in to know that decisions that we're going to make are going to be focused around this. The time of waiting and the time of debating are over. The time of action is upon us, and Minnesotans are people of action. So with that, we'll sign it into law. Today, Minnesota takes another step into a brighter future. It's gone. There we go. With that, if there's any questions, please ask away.
What are you thinking about, or I'm not sure if you're the person or one of the commissioners, in terms of clean car standards? What's the starting point, ultimately, where are we going to go?
Commissioner Bishop, you want to talk about where we're at on rulemaking?
Sure. Thank you. So we're undergoing the rulemaking process right now at the MPCA. We've held meetings all around the state, 6 public meetings, as well as an open comment period that is still open now through this week. And after that, we will be doing kind of an assessment on the standards, as well as taking into account the public input that we received, with a goal of completing that process by December of 2020. So it's a year out before we would have an end to the analysis and potential enactment of the standards. And with that in place, it would impact 2023 models of vehicles. So manufacturers would be required to bring into the state a certain percent of their fleet that would be either low emissions or electric, fully zero emissions vehicles into their fleets under that 2023 model.
And is this going to get phased in, or will the percentages increase as time goes on?
So that is something that is looking at as well. So as the standard gets implemented, and again, this is about 11 states that already have it in place, and now we'll be the 13th state that will be considering it. New Mexico is also looking at that, and those states will all move at the same pace.
And are you going to grandfather existing vehicles, or is there going to be emission testing, or is any of that in the potential mix?
It doesn't impact your current vehicles, and there will not be emissions testing. We're not adopting that part of a rulemaking. Our rulemakings are just for those vehicles, future vehicles coming into the state.
So the idea is to phase the higher emission vehicles out, or if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the more that we have low emissions vehicles and zero emissions vehicles in our supply, we have, right now there's about 40 different vehicles that meet those standards, and only about 20 of them are available here in Minnesota. So we hope to increase that supply, and then also we'd like to see a used market for those vehicles in the future where people are making that transition. And we expect by 2025, the vehicle makers say that there'll be about 127 different models that meet these standards. So we see this transition starting to happen, and here in Minnesota, we'd like to see it happen quickly.
Yeah, the market is starting to drive this, as we knew. This makes sure that Minnesotans are there. This makes sure that there's a level playing field and innovation is leading. I'd also like to note and thank Commissioner Bishop's leadership also. As this takes time and as we have a thoughtful approach to this, this is the type of thing that will come out of the subcabinet. But there's also us working on the infrastructure sides of things, using the VW settlement money, of getting a much more robust charging station. If you talk to people, that's the #1 thing. You'll talk to a lot of people, and we know what the research shows us. they want one of these vehicles. As the range increases, you're starting to see the ads. I know you saw the new Ford Mustang SUV that's coming out or whatever. They're saying predicted range over 300 miles. That seems to be the sweet spot with people if they know they can get that. And then there's rapid charging stations all along. So once we figure those corridors on 94, on 35, and start to expand out, that will start to happen. Now, obviously, there will be those that would like to sell fossil fuels to us, and they will try and do all they can to make it more difficult to build up that infrastructure. That's why this bold leadership, that's why going towards clean cars will unleash a lot of that. So I'm really excited about what's happening there, and there's certainly a well-thought-out path to get Minnesota there.
As these things go, many of the benchmarks are several years, even several decades out. How will the public know whether you're making a dent with the initiatives you're trying to?
Yeah, and this is what you're going to see, and I'll segue this, and it will be shortly after the first of the year, something we've been working around on our continuous improvement plans, our thought of our overall goals of start putting out measurable outcomes across state government, about forward-leaning dashboards that let you see this. We will start to see these emission numbers. We'll start to see, as we build that out, start to see some of those decreases, start to see the jobs that are being created, engaging the public much more. The good news is when it comes to clean energy, and as you heard the numbers from Commissioner Kelly, Greater Minnesota knows this. They know where the jobs are coming from in solar. They know where the jobs are coming in biofuels. They know where the jobs are coming in wind power. They see the future that is in these communities around that. We'll start to do more of that. But there will be a very clear definition of success, a very clear standards to try and meet. And as you heard, again, Commissioner Kelly said, once we did this, once in 2007, when Governor Paulini signed into law our RFS, and we started to see those changes, we started to meet them. That's why, along and being very clear about clean cars, nationally we were on this glide path until the administration pulled them down and pulled them back. This is where everybody wanted to go, and in fact, many of the major manufacturers said, well, we don't care what the administration says, we're moving in that way anyway because people are asking for these. The consumer is asking for low emission or zero emission vehicles. They're asking for that opportunity to be able to do something, because the one thing that's very clear, the public understands the existential threat of this, and I appreciate the Lieutenant Governor saying this. And when we meet with young people around climate change, those of you in this room, whether it's your children or your grandchildren, talk to them. They do not deserve to have what's pushed onto them of fearing for their future, of fearing a world where the things that they love and the opportunities that we've had in the outdoors aren't going to be there. When you talk to fourth graders, they understand that we are on the edge of another mass extinction because of the choices we're making, and they are simply not willing to allow that to happen. So I'm hopeful on this in a way that only Minnesotans can be. We can get this, and we'll move forward.
Governor, the youth climate activists, the climate strike activists, are calling on the State Board of Investment to immediately divest from fossil fuel industry companies. What's your response or position on that?
Yeah, we started when we first came in, and in fact, on Friday, we published our first report on a glide path of what we do on investments and divestments around fossil fuels. That report was published on Friday. It's out there available for all. We asked, and it was done on a consultants to go outside and take a look, and Minnesota is one of the forward-leaning states, as are pensions, that are a little over $100 billion of investments. We have a fiduciary responsibility to our pensioners. We also have a responsibility to socially invest in a responsible manner. We have this program that's out there. We're grateful that our young people are understanding this. We're grateful that the young people understand that there is an entire spectrum of things that we need to do, and that's why we're encouraging them to take a look at all of these things. So I think you'll hear today at the State Board of Investments, some of these folks will be here. I think later this week they're going to gather. We encourage them to do so, and I'm encouraging all of you. Take a look at the report that we commissioned. It starts to give us a path to responsibly invest. And the good news is once again, as we think about these investments, as we start thinking about our pension and where the state is in, as we move towards a green economy, the opportunities are there to not only reduce carbon emissions, but to create jobs and create return on the investments that outpace where our current fossil fuel investments are. So that's a path that we are looking towards. We're looking at being responsible in terms of that fiduciary responsibility, but also understanding there is a strong desire for folks to have socially responsible investing, to include climate, to include racial justice, to include all of the things that make sustainability in a state for everyone more attainable.
On the clean power, in other words, the utility portion of it, the utilities that are doing this, or I think are going away from fossil fuels, but my question is, what is the stance going to be on nuclear? Because potentially there could be proposals to increase nuclear capacity to.
Yeah, and if I can have Commissioner Kelly, I would talk about this, that we're certainly open to all the solutions. Nuclear power, while its capacity to be able to reduce carbon emissions certainly has its storage problems. One of the issues we've had here in Minnesota, especially as it deals with Prairie Island, that there was a pledge to remove the above-ground casks that have been stored there. Not only have those original, I believe, 13 have multiplied to 42, I believe now. So that is a significant issue around it. I, for one, have made the case that we need to approach this both triage the immediate need to reduce carbon emissions, but then look at those long-term goals. Until the federal government has a solution around storage that is much more permanent and much more sustainable, I don't think there's anybody, and maybe Commissioner Kelly could correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't seen anybody apply for a new license around nuclear just because of the issues that are there.
So the bill that the governor introduced earlier this year, in the 100% by 2050 goal, recognized that nuclear is a clean energy technology. So that would be eligible at the 2050 point, but the rest of the bill does not change any of Minnesota's current law with respect to nuclear power. And one of the things that we've seen is that it's been harder and harder to build new nuclear power plants because of the costs that developers have been experiencing with respect to nuclear power.
Well, Commissioner, let me ask you this may be a question for the governor. Hypothetical, but maybe not outside the realm of possibility. Let's say that Excel comes and says, yeah, we can do this 2050 standard, but we're going to have to expand nuclear capacity or at least keep those casks at Prairie Island a little bit longer. What's the administration's stance going to be on that?
Well, let's first, the resource plan that Xcel Energy introduced this summer does call for extending the life of the Monticello power plant for an additional 10 years so that Xcel Energy can achieve their carbon-free goal that they're aiming for. But they have not talked about yet the Monticello plant, the Prairie Island plant, in the future there. And until there's a place to take the casks, there is no, as far as I am aware, there's no current discussion on the timetable for removing the casks because there's no receiving facility.
Yes.
Governor, you talked about clean energy and clean cars. The other major greenhouse gas emissions are coming from agriculture. Anything that you guys are looking at as far as ag goes?
Yeah, also the potential of agriculture is from regenerative agriculture, and the ability of carbon sequestration was something when I voted for cap and trade legislation early in my congressional career. One of the reasons is of course the existential threat of climate change, but also the great potential that Minnesota has around this. And I think what you're seeing is from an agricultural perspective and sustainable agriculture, people on the land know more than anything what's facing them. If you're up in northwest Minnesota, you understand this. There's folks up there saying we've never seen this in our lifetime. And I think you're seeing a pretty rapid transition of folks starting to think about how do we maintain soil health. That is a bipartisan belief. How do we make sure that we're using regenerative agriculture as a way to try and tackle this, and how can we be part of the solution? So I think there's a great opportunity there. I still stand strongly with the potential for the third, fourth, and fifth generations of biofuels that are out there, the ability for us to be able to lead. This last week, along with Governor Noem, we asked to take the aromatics, the highly toxic, highly carcinogenic aromatics out of gasoline. We can use biofuels that are a safer alternative. So I see that as a great opportunity for Minnesota. And right now, while there is carbon in terms of some of the input costs or whatever, we're already seeing some of the zero or the low emission vehicles in agriculture coming out. There's going to be a strong desire, just like there is in the transportation sector, to move us away from that. So,
one more question, I'm going to let the commissioners get back to it. The governor can stick around for a few off topic.
Governor, your HHS commissioners in front of the House committee this morning.
can we take that after? Are we done?
If we're done,
sorry.
you can go ahead and ask. I'm going to go with the side door.
Can I just ask one about transit, if you don't mind?
Sure.
What's the thought on LRT as opposed to bus rapid transit in this whole scheme thing?
Yeah, well, first of all, transit is an absolute necessity in this, that we've seen it. I made the case last year and put out, the Lieutenant Governor and I and this administration put out a very robust plan around not just urban transit, but greater Minnesota transit. We know with an aging population, I'm very familiar with Region 9 around the 9 counties around Mankato, St. James, that that transit system is really looking to expand. And so that's certainly a great way as we put in some of our electric buses. I always think this discussion about light rail versus bus rapid transit, those are local decisions that need to be made, of course, through Met Council and some of the collaborative efforts in the greater metro area. But I again, if it makes sense to run bus rapid transit or if it makes sense to do light rail, we need to pursue those. One of the issues we know is with rail, the process takes a little more time, but the other thing with bus rapid transit, we have to be thoughtful about our infrastructure needs, our infrastructure buildup, of how that's going to make a difference. But certainly transit is a big part of this. Certainly transit as an option that's convenient for folks, that works, that is a great way to not only reduce carbon emissions, it's a great way to bring, as Lieutenant Governor said, some equity in moving people to and from their jobs, to give opportunities that might not be available by communities that are isolated because of a transportation system that bogs them down, that's too dependent on individual automobiles in many cases for those communities to be able to fully participate. So
I'm going to open the side door here. If you guys want to take off, and then we'll take just a second.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Governor will speak to your question.
yeah, it's exciting. I'll come back to this one first.
Sure.
We'll let them get out. We can get it, so. Thank you, Commissioner. Please go right ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about the hearing your APDEC commissioners at the House today presenting her plan and kind of review after the first 90 days.
Yeah.
Is it enough? What she's proposing, and have you reviewed what she's presenting to the House?
Yeah, so today, Commissioner Harpstead is in front of the House. We asked to a 90-day plan once she came in. Had several fold that was asked of her. I asked her to fully assess the agency in terms of processes and process improvement to make sure that the checks and balances were in place, to do a deep dive on the audit to find issues that would surface themselves, which she's done on about 5 or 6 occasions, and then to put forward a potential plan both internally for process improvements and better delivery of services both to the clients, to the Minnesotans who receive those services, and to the taxpayers to ensure that they're getting it right, and then to come back with us. We have reviewed that. I think it is a thoughtful, it is a robust plan. I think you're going to see strong bipartisan support for an issue that's been around for decades. And then out of our administration, I think looking at some of the things that after she presents today and we get a little bit deeper analysis from folks across the political spectrum, across the experts in delivery of services, I have a strong desire to take a look at the structure of the agency itself, because that's one of the things in organizational design that the Lieutenant Governor and I both, one of the first things we did was look at the organizational charts in all these agencies. We looked at the Child Care Assistance Program and some of the oversight in that, where we had problems over the last several years. One of the first things we did was to streamline that, make that more accountable, and have a clear chain of command on how that would be done. So I'm excited today to see what comes out of that. I'm grateful for the work that the Commissioner has already done, and I think a statement that I made, and those who did, this will be our 11th month in office. I think this issue around DHS started arising in about February, and obviously there have been challenges. But as we continue to lean forward, one of the old good pieces of wisdom I received was, if you're going to have a job cutting down a tree, you should spend the bulk of your time sharpening the axe. I think we have spent our time sharpening that axe right now, and I think now after today, it'll be time to start thinking about what that alignment looks like.
Governor, speaking of trees,
Yes.
Wisconsin's Christmas or holiday tree went up in their capital. Minnesota hasn't had one in its rotunda since 2013. I know it's your first year. Are you going to bring that tradition back?
It is coming to my residence down there. So we're doing it at the residence. I believe on Thursday, if my team would tell me that, we're going to light our Christmas tree.
But that one's been there for a while.
And says,
I mean, they've been doing that for residents for a while, but there used to be one every year in the Capitol Rotunda.
not at this time, but I'm certainly, we'll listen to Minnesotans. We'll see how it goes, where they want it. One of the things is that we've kind of highlighted the sense of Minnesota and One Minnesota around the residents. Earlier this year, we did our first iftar during Ramadan. And I think it's appropriate that we'll be coming back again. We had our first Easter there. We will have a Christmas tree. We will have a menorah on there. I think Minnesotans seeing this idea that there's a place to coexist together. So we'll be doing it down there.
Any other questions?
Please.
Any update on insulin?
Pardon me?
Insulin?
Oh, yeah, well, my and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan and this administration is fully committed. I'm grateful, and I think it was just Rochester Post-Bulletin last week did what many, especially in greater Minnesota, news outlets have said. Bring this out in the open, negotiate this out. We still have not moved from that point of 2 weeks ago when I called for them to end the practice behind doors of negotiating this. They're not moving it. I think there's been a little bit of progress. I will say that optimistically in speaking to the participants in the room. But once again, my call and last Friday, a week ago Friday, said, why don't we just triage this thing? Why don't we come up with a solution for those most in need, have emergency availability at pharmacies with very little intervention to try and get that, and then let's look at long-term costs and long-term further out. That way we could make sure that folks who are in crisis are not going to have to ration or not going to have to risk their health, but we could take a little deeper dive if that's the goal to try and get there. But I'm still committed to getting this done. Lieutenant Governor and I are one branch, co-equal branch. There needs to be legislative changes here. The legislature needs to do its work. The legislature knows that Minnesotans are asking for this. The legislature has had an opportunity since May to work on this. They continue to say they want to do it. And I just think sunshine on this would do a wonderful, be a wonderful push to get this over the edge. So I'm still hopeful. I set the goal that by the end of the year and before the holidays that we would have something done on emergency insulin, and we're still pushing.
One more today?
Thanks,
everybody.